Hey there, guys. This is Peng here. So I'm recording this on Saturday morning, UK time. So only two games have been played so far in black and white for SPL week 3. And those have been Soulwind against Fakes and Finch against Caetano. And I thought I would just go through a quick analysis of the teams those four players all used. Obvious spoilers for the games to follow. So if you haven't watched these, I recommend not watching them because we're going to talk through in depth about certain damage ranges and calcs and EV spreads and move selections. So if you've not seen the games, go watch these first before watching this, because otherwise I'll spoil it for you. But basically, I'm not going to analyze the actual games themselves in depth. I just want to kind of talk about the teams that they've built and try and work out what the unrevealed slots could be based on what we know and some calcing. Just in case anyone's interested in trying to replicate some of these teams or trying to get an idea for black and white team building, how you can work this stuff out. So the first game was Soulwind against Fakes, and as you can see here, they're both using variations of Sound Balance with double Psychic. Fakes going a bit more of a standard route using Latios plus Reuniclus, although the combination of Ferrothorn and Heatran is somewhat uncommon. Normally you don't really see Heatran with Ferro that much. You'd normally see it with like Skarmory and like Gastra and stuff like that, but it definitely works here. The idea of these teams is generally to support Reuniclus with spikes and Latios, which forces tons of damage on the very few things that can beat Reuniclus, like Tyranitar and Jirachi and things like that. They can't really reliably hold back spikes, Latios, and Reuniclus all in the same game, so that's a really, really strong offensive option. And then surrounded by like this bulky Sand Core with Lando and T-Tar, and then a Sunny Day. We didn't see Sunny Day, but most likely a Sunny Day Magma Storm Heatran, because otherwise this team is really, really struggling against rain boosted Hydros from Keldeo. Like, I think you pretty much auto lose to a lot of Keldeo teams if you don't have a Sunny Day Tran in the slot. And then Soulwind's running out something a little bit weirder, and that is using a double Psychic team, but also, but instead of being built around more standard stuff like Latios Reuniclus, it's built around Mew and Latias. So let's take a look at the teams and what was revealed in these games. So I'm going to talk through Soulwind's team first. So what we saw was that Tyranitar was Choice Scarfed, and it had at least these 3 moves. It was almost certainly going to be Pursuit in the last slot. We then had a lefties Skarmory, which we didn't really learn too much about because it took a Thunder very early in the game from Reuniclus, but it's probably going to be Spikes, Roost, Brave Bird, Whirlwind, although of course Brave Bird can be dropped for things like Taunt. Then I had a Rotom Wash, which looked to be the standard burn spreader. We didn't see Hydro. It might not have been Hydro, actually, just because you feel like you would have seen it used against Heatran a bit more often if it was Hydro, but it was actually weakened fairly early. So it could be Hydro, it could be HP Ice, and then the final slot's probably Pain Split. You got Stormbreaker Mew, which uses Will-O-Wisp and Ice Beam, and the last slots are almost certainly going to be Taunt and Soft Boiled. You got an Excadrill, which looked to be a defensive set of some kind with Stealth Rock, Rapid Spin, Earthquake, and either Protect, Toxic, or Iron Head in the last slot. I imagine it's probably... Yeah, I can't tell actually. And then Latias was some kind of defensive or more bulkier set with Dragon Pulse and Roost rather than any kind of like choiced shenanigans, because it was leftovers. So what is this team trying to do? This team, in short, looks to be building towards a Latias endgame. And it's doing that by supporting it with 2 burners. And it's using, in this case, Rotom and Mew. So this kind of strategy is nothing hugely new. A lot of people have used teams that use things like Gastrodon or Protect Toxic Keldeo or Heatran or Jellicent or things like that to force burns on defensive steals, on Ferrothorn, on Tyranitar, in order to set up for something like Alakazam or Reuniclus to sweep. What you don't see very often is you don't see Mew in that slot very often, and you don't see Latias as the late game option too regularly either. And the reason for this is fairly straightforward. It looks like Mew is quite niche, because if you wanted to build around Reuniclus, for example, you wouldn't want to use Mew, because Mew provides the exact same set of defensive resistances as Reuniclus does, so they overlap almost entirely. What that means is you're basically running 2 very, very similar defensive Psychics on the team, and you end up opening up weaknesses to... It's probably quite difficult to then patch up a weakness to Specs Keldeo or to other stuff once you've already committed to down using 2 pure psychic types. So that's why you don't really see Mew on teams, because it doesn't support Alakazam very well, and it doesn't support Reuniclus that whether it supports both of them well, but it opens up like some significant weaknesses from just 2 slots at the beginning. So what Soulwind's chosen to do here is he's gone, right, I want to use Mew, but or he wants to use Latias, and he sees the option of pairing these 2 together. And what he goes is okay, if I'm going to use a pure psychic type supporter to bait in the Tyranitar or the Ferrothorn or Excadrill or whatever his late game psychic has to be something that has some kind of defensive utility. So it can't really be a Reuniclus, it can't really be Alakazam, like all this sort of stuff it just doesn't provide enough defensive utility. But Latias is actually a really shrewd decision, because what this does is it immediately patches up the Specs Keldeo weaknesses that you're going to be opening up as soon as you add something like Mew on. And so what I reckon this set probably is, I probably reckon it's going to be Calm Mind, and I think it's likely Refresh in the last slot. And it's because this team does not have anything that wants to come in on Scald very regularly. Like, you look at this team, it's got nothing to come in on Gastrodon. It's got nothing to come in on it just doesn't enjoy facing Gastro or Jellicent or any of that sort of stuff. Because Rotom, although it can take a Skull Burn in a pinch, like, you ideally don't want to be letting it take those burns, because it massively impacts its survivability. And if Rotom gets burned and you've only got 1 water resist left, and that water resist hasn't got Refresh, like, you're immediately opened up to getting cheesed out by something like just Scald Tentacruel or whatever. So I think it's almost certainly Refresh in the slot. It could be Sub. I think if it was Sub, we would have seen it during the game, to be honest. But I would probably bet on this being a Refresh set. So the way this works then is that you use Rotom to burn Ferrothorn, use Mew to burn Tyranitar, and from there, Latias has a field day against a lot of builds. As a late game sweeper, as well as if you choose not to go down that direction, Latias can at least serve as a really good pivot against things like opposing Rotom and opposing Keldeo and Thundurus and all this sort of stuff in the early and mid game. So it's really, really solid. You pair that with spike stacking, your own Excadrill to remove spikes, and then a Choice Scarf Tyranitar. And this is like a really, really interesting team build. So yeah, big fan of this. Massive props for Soulwind for coming up for the idea of Mew plus Latias. I've not seen that before, at least not in modern black and white. It might have been a thing back in like 2012. My memory's getting a bit foggy, but yeah, really cool idea. I think Stormbreaker Mew is definitely interesting. I spoke about it in a video last week about general viability of stuff on Sands. I said that I thought Stormbreaker Mew certainly had some viability alongside other psychics. I was talking about it in that context alongside Alakazam and Reuniclus, where I thought it was on the cusp of being viable, but I think here it's actually a fantastic decision to use Mew. I think it's really, really clever. It forces really specific lines of counterplay. It gets really reliable burns on stuff. And yeah. One of the issues with Stormbreaker Mew is it's completely shut down by opposing Heatran. And so Soulwind, in a sense, then was pretty unlucky to run into a team that featured Heatran, Tyranitar, Ferrothorn, because it means it was always going to be really, really difficult to get a burn on Tyranitar and Ferrothorn with a Heatran sitting around. And to that extent, Soulwind's game plan never really came off against a squad like this. This is like, the matchup is actually really, really good here for Fakes, I think, because of the Heatran protecting T-Tar from getting burned. That said, Soulwind played well, and he would probably argue only lost because of a U-turn crit on Mew. I'm not sure it's that straightforward, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting game. So on to Fakes' team. It's a 6 we've seen before. I'm not sure I've seen these exact 6 sets on that team before. I've seen variants that were Scarf Lando and then Double Hazard Ferrothorn, but I think this is a lot more solid. So what this team is, as you can see, it is a non-choice Tyranitar. It didn't reveal Chople, but I think it has to be, otherwise you lose pretty badly to Alakazam. It was a Leftovers Lando. We only saw Rocks and U-turn, but I think it's almost definitely Earthquake and HP Ice. If I get Ice on there we go. It was a Ferrothorn, which is Spikes, Power Whip. It's probably knockoff there. And then the last slot we didn't see either, but it's going to be like another attack, or it's going to be Worry Seed or something like that. This team is actually, maybe not Worry Seed. Yeah, I don't know. It could be a lot of stuff. Heatran was the Magma Trapper set. We didn't see Sunny Day and Solar Beam, but I think it has to be. Otherwise, this team's matchup against Standard Rain is pretty horrific. Choice Scarf Latios, again, because of the Rain matchup, I think this has to be Trick Recover. Otherwise, you're getting run over by Thunderous T. Even without it, I think this team's really bad against Thunderous T anyway. I think one Thunder Paralysis into Latios, and like this team is done by Thunderous, but I guess it's a kind of a risk you have to take. And maybe Soulwind doesn't have much Thunderous T usage. In the past, off the top of my head, I can't remember Soulwind using those kind of Rain teams massively often in the last few months at least. But it's probably a set like this. And then Reuniclus. So we saw the entire Reuniclus set. It was Calm Mind, Bolt Beam. And yeah, this team worked out pretty much exactly how you want it to. It used Latios to sort of like plow holes and stuff. Reuniclus took out Skarmory in the early game, which meant that Lander was quite tough to handle, just kept U-turning on stuff, and then ultimately U-turn crit on Mew, just completely closed the game out, I think. But yeah, good team selection from Fakes. Nothing completely out of the ordinary, but definitely really solid. Double Steel, T-Tar, and then double Psychic, plus Landorus. Really nice stuff. The second game was Finchinator against Caetano, which is a really interesting matchup because Finch is often, and I think very unfairly, spoken about as like somebody who only uses standard teams. And I think he's doing a lot more recently to get rid of that label. So for example, last week we saw him using Colba Berry plus Raw Latios, which is a really nice way to prevent Latios from getting pursuit trapped, and therefore you can rack up loads of hazard damage, and then in the late game you can't handle Alakazam anymore. I think that's really, really clever. But generally Finch is known for using quite standard builds, whereas Caetano is known for really pushing the boat out and using some proper wacky stuff. So to see Kieran here from Katana is not the most surprising thing. Like I'd probably bet on Katana using something like Kieran Rain or Moltres Rain at least once during his SPL run. So it's not completely out of Katana's wheelhouse to use something like this. But for Finch to bring Milotic, I think is a really, really interesting choice. And as soon as I saw this, I thought that is not a typical Finch team. Even these sort of teams are not something I would consider Finchinator using all that often. He tends to go down a much more bulky offense route with Sand, with Ferrothorn and Lando and Rotom and Latios and all that sort of stuff, rather than using these more grimy or Gliscor kind of builds. But it definitely works out in this game because you can see here that Caetano almost definitely predicted Finch to bring something more like his standard teams because Kieran is pretty infamously known as a Sand balance destroyer. Sub-Roost Kieran has a ridiculously good matchup against Sand balance, especially if the Excadrill is slower. Yeah, it's a really, really rough matchup. If you're using like standard Sand with Ferrothorn and Lando, like it's really, really tough to break past a Sub-Roost Kieran with those teams. Similarly, Kyurem is also going to be really, really good against a lot of the standard Rain builds that Finch is known to use with things like Polito, Tentacruel, Ferrothorn, Thunderous, Scarf Latios, and Keldeo. Those teams also struggle quite badly against Sub-Roost Kyurem. So you can fully understand why Caetano brought it here, and against probably like 9 weeks out of 10, it would have done really well against Finch, but it's done really badly here because it completely whiffs into this particular Milotic. So let's get into the teams that were used then. This is Finch's team, or at least what we know of it. So it was a Scarf Tyranitar, it was an Excadrill with Rapid Spin and Earthquake, it was a Sub-Salac Berry Charge Beam Magnezone, standard Stealth Rock Celebi with Special Defense, a Milotic, which weirdly wasn't using any of Milotic's new tricks like Dragon Tail and Mirror Coat, but actually using its standard ADV set with Scald, Toxic, Refresh, Recover. And then late game option to close things out looks to be SD Gliscor. So these teams are becoming increasingly common. It's pretty well known as like the McMegan variant of Sand Balance because he was very ahead of the curve in using things like Celebi plus Magnezone to fish out Ferrothorn. And then like normally you'd have a Gastrodon here. Teams that use Ferrothorn tend to be really weak to Gastrodon once Ferrothorn's gone. And then similarly, Magnezone also can trap Skarmory, which is needed for SD Gliscor to pave the way for stuff. So it's using Magnezone more to enable defensive threats than it is to enable hugely scary offensive stuff like Dragmag would do. But yeah, McMegan pretty much popularized this stuff, and it's seen tons of usage in the last few weeks. I think it's been rolled out now 4 times in SPL over 3 weeks, almost exactly the same team each time. So yeah, definitely an up-and-coming team style to look out for. Now, one of the main issues with these teams is that they tend to be really bad against Alakazam, and the reason for that is that everything gets hit super effectively except for your bulky grass type. Your bulky water type. So normally you'd run Gastrodon here, like a Scald, Ice Beam, Toxic, and Recover set, and that gives you a little bit of leeway against non-grass, not Alakazam. In addition to that, you have to pump a lot of special defense into stuff that you would rather not have to use it. It's like Excadrill has to go like a lot of special defense in order to reliably be a check to Alakazam. Gliscor it's using special defense anyway, but it's using a lot to make sure it doesn't lose to Zam. So you normally go 164 special defense careful and max HP at least, so you don't die to HP ice from max. Celebi is typically running specially defensive normally anyway, but kind of needs to be Alakazam too. And then all of this is kind of compounded if you use Choice Scarf Tyranitar, because Choice Scarf Tyranitar no longer beats Alakazam. It flat out loses to a Focus Blast if you don't use Tropical Berry. So there are intrinsic Alakazam issues with teams like this. But by putting Milotic over Gastrodon, you patch up those pretty well, because Milo is much bulkier on the specially defensive side compared to Gastrodon. Even without any investment, I'm not even sure it would have had any special defense investment on this team. I actually didn't do any calcs in Milo, but it looks like it probably wasn't all that invested in special defense. But yeah, Alakazam struggles to break this. So it immediately improves that matchup quite a lot. The second thing that also helps a lot against Alakazam and general Psychic Spam teams is to use U-Turn Celebi over the typical Baton Pass. So Baton Pass's main benefit is that it evades Pursuit. So it means that you can't, it means that Tyranitar and like the rare Scizor and stuff like that can't just trap Celebi, because it'll always escape with Baton Pass. Now, using U-Turn does open up a hole to opposing Tyranitar, which are going to do like 60% with a Pursuit. That's especially an issue because you've lost Gastrodon here, which means that Rotom Wash plus Tyranitar is all of a sudden now really scary with U-Turn. But what U-Turn does is it massively improves the matchup against Alakazam, because it means that now you've got a way to do up to 80% against Alakazam. If I was to show you here, Alakazam's taking 79.6% max from Celebi U-Turn, even with a Mind's Attack nature. So that certainly helps. A lot more damage than Psychic, and also means that you can chip it as you U-turn to Milotic, and if Milotic is healthy, then it's just basically a really clever way of making sure that you never have to let like your harder counters come directly into Alakazam. So if Alakazam tries to come in on Celebi, Celebi would normally struggle 1v1 against it just with Psychic and Baton Pass, but if you U-turn, you can break the sash, go into Gliscor and Earthquake it, or go into Milotic and Scald it. Like, you've got tons of options. Then go into Excadrill if it's healthy and Earthquake it or Spin. You've got tons of options against Alakazam there. We also saw U-turn be really interesting in this game due to one really, really specific set of calcs, which I think works really well with Tyranitar. And I think that this was a very deliberate decision to work out all the calcs for this from Finch rather than simply some accident that happened during the game, because U-turn also hits Latios for about 36 to 42% or something. Yeah, 36 to 43%. Which means that after Stealth Rock, which is 12.5, Latios is going to be left at least, like 52 max-ish? 51 max? And then if you U-turn straight into Tyranitar from that position, Tyranitar Pursuit, even if the opponent doesn't switch, there's 53 max. So you've got a completely foolproof way of trapping Latios, which is really nice for these teams, because often, particularly against Rain, you don't want to be switching Tyranitar directly into a Latios. This combination of specially defensive Celebi always takes a Draco Meteor with like 30% left, U-turns to Titar, and guaranteed Pursuit KO without needing to predict anything, I think is really, really clever way of dealing with the Latios issue. Massive props to Finch for that. Something interesting here is that Celebi's U-turn in this game actually did less damage than the minimum. You can see it did 36% in this game. If you go back and watch the replay, the minimum roll is 36.5. So it looks like Finch was using negative attack IVs on his Celebi, possibly by accident. I would imagine what he's done is he's probably built the team initially using Bat and Pass, and then switched it to U-turn fairly late and not remembered to go change the IVs again. That's probably what I think would have happened. Thankfully for him, it didn't make a difference here. If he played Zam, it very well could have, but yeah, it works out fine for him. But he probably should go back and change that to max attack. Celebi, 31 IVs here. But yeah, the other way that this team inserts a bit more creativity, because normally these teams like really set in stone. Normally this is a Gastro, and you have there's not a huge amount of room for creativity on these builds, but you can find some in the Magnezone set, because these teams generally are okay against Excadrill. If you're using Gliscor and using a set like this with 92 defense or just a bit of defense, you've got quite a lot of insurance against most variants of Drill. Like max attack Adamant can be scary, but you should be okay. You've always got Scarf Tartar Revenge Kill. You've got a defensive Water. It's not an ideal matchup, but you're okay against Drill, especially because now most of them seem to be especially defensive. What that means is that you don't need to use the standard Air Balloon Magnezone, and you can get creative with it. So I've spoken before about how you can use Chople plus Thunderwave in this slot, which lets you have a check to Alakazam in the late game if you keep it quite healthy. It's not ideal, but it's something. You can also use like Rocky Helmet here, which can be really nice against Dragmag, because this team actually, I think it pretty much always loses two Pokemon to Kieran B, because Kieran Black, like if it comes on a Celebi or Milotic or something like that, or Gliscor, like nothing takes an Outrage, and then Excadrill, if it's not Adamant, isn't going to OHKO it. Tarantar, don't think OHKOs it with Stone Edge. Yeah, like you lose a lot of assets to Kieran, but if you have like something like Rocky Helmet plus Thunderwave, you've at least got Magnezone, which can help. But your Flash Cutter here helps too. But yeah, like there's tons of room for creativity on the Magnezone sets to very specifically tech against really specific matchups. So what Finch has chosen to do here is to go with the substitute Charge Beam set with Salak Berry. And what that does is it massively changes the tides against spike stacking teams, particularly with Alakazam, which would be one of the worst matchups here. And the way that this works is if they're using Ferrothorn, Magnezone is going to be able to trap the Ferrothorn pretty easily with Bat and Pass support. And if they're not going to Ferrothorn on Celebi, then they're actively losing progress in other ways, because Celebi Psychic is like chipping tons of stuff on those kind of teams. So Bat and Pass Celebi into Magnezone is going to trap Ferrothorn fairly consistently. From there, you can sub and Charge Beam, and you can see I think Finch got to +4 or +5 in that game. And substitute repeatedly into Salak Berry range. And then from there, what you've got like a +4, +5-ish Magnezone with +1 speed behind a substitute, which has taken out Ferrothorn, and you've got to find some kind of way to revenge kill that with your sand spike stacking teams. Now, because of Flash Cannon, Latios cannot be your revenge killer. Tarantar cannot be your revenge killer. Maybe Landorus could if it lives a HP flyer, like with that many boosts, but maybe not. If you've got like a Garchomp, that could. But a lot of teams, their only way to come in and combat a Magnezone from that point is going to be an Alakazam. And Alakazam will admittedly like win from that point, because Sash Alakazam is faster than +1 Magnezone, so it can always just Psychic into the sub, break it, and then Psychic to kill the Magnezone. But what Magnezone will have done that already, it will have done its job perfectly, in that it's removed the Ferrothorn and it's taken Alakazam down to Sash, and then from there you've got U-turn Celebi, you've got Milotic, which is like pretty robust against it. You've got Gliscor, always takes 1 HP Ice. You've got Excadrill, always takes a Focus Blast. Yeah, like this the matchup all of a sudden now is solved against those kind of builds. So I think this was a really, really clever decision by Finch to use this set. It's a really aggressive way of making sure that things that would otherwise be scary, um, like Alakazam, are all of a sudden barely a factor now. Like I can't think of a way that I would reliably beat this team with a standard Alakazam plus Ferrothorn plus Latios spike stacking build. Kind of like the team that you saw Fakes use, but with Alakazam and Uniplus. I actually cannot think how you'd reliably beat this team with that. It's the matchup is absolutely overwhelming. So to go through these last few spreads, then this is probably max attack. This Excadrill, based on the damage rolls from Kieran, it looks like it's pretty close to max. Careful, although it definitely could be a bit less than that. It could be something like 196 or something. Macazone, standard. Celebi's especially defensive because of the roll from Specs Latios, so that's something like this. You actually might want to go even slower than that so that you always underspeed opposing Celebi with U-turn. And then Milo, and then the Gliscor's all normal too. But yeah, really cool team choice by Finch, and really nice adaptations to what he saw with threats against the team, like Alakazam. Completely undoes the matchup with the addition of Milotic. An aggressive Macazone set that forces a revenge kill and U-turn Celebi. Like I mentioned, it does open up weaknesses. It opens up weaknesses to Rotomosh plus Titar, because now you've not got a Gastro. The loss of Gastro also impacts the Sword Stance Gliscor matchup, because although Milotic, if it runs max bold, it is like very, very slightly bulkier than Gastrodon would be with the same EV spread. But the issue is that it's not sand immune, so it actually has a way rougher matchup against opposing ST Gliscor, which I think does actually probably 1v1 it. Yeah, I think that's potentially an issue. So that's maybe, I mean, did we see all four of these? Maybe this could be like an Ice Punch or an Ice Beam Titar. And the Gliscor, it could maybe have a bit of speed to make sure it always beats opposing Gliscor, and has Ice Fang too. So it's not like an unwinnable matchup, but basically Gliscor gets tons of free Sword Stances against teams like this. Like Drill, defensive Drill, is a setup fodder for it. Like Scarftar to an extent too, if it's pursuit locked. Magazone, depending on how many boosts it gets, is pretty bad against Gliscor. Celebi setup fodder, and then this set doesn't 2-hit KO after Poison Heal. So it's definitely a rough matchup against opposing SD Gliscor. I probably would have run Dragon Tail or Ice Beam Milo to improve that, but that opens up other holes too. So you can't beat everything. Yeah, but all in all, solid team selection from Finch. And then finally we have Caetano's team. So Katana, known for being wacky, running out something like this. So we know the Lando team was Choice Scarf, which inherently is kind of a bad matchup against Finch's selection here, which has double protect. It just is not going to make progress at all. So that's really unfortunate for Caetano. Similarly, Choice Specs Latios ended up being really bad against the selection of specially defensive U-turn Celebi plus Scarftar. It took Latios out of the game for basically nothing. Titar stayed max HP. Celebi took like 60%, but it's always going to recover that on Politoed or Ferrothorn or Tentacruel, none of which can do significant damage to it. So yeah, like you'd always take that trade with the Celebi damage to keep Titar healthy. Kieran did temporarily look like a really, really good pick here until we knew it was Sub-Protect and not Sub-Roost. If it was Sub-Roost, it probably beats the Milotic one-on-one with pressure stalling the skulls and pressure stalling the recovers. But unfortunately, it's Sub-Protect. Now, I can see why it's Sub-Protect, because Sub-Protect is really nice to deplete Ferrothorn Gyro Balls. So if you're pretty confident that Finch is going to bring his standard Titar, Ferro, Rotom, Latios builds, Kyurem, like Sub-Protect Kyurem is an absolute fantastic shout. I think Caetano went a bit too all in with the Protect. I think that ideally, like, even just Sub-Roost with knockoff Ferro of your own, with 2 Scald users, with like Trick Latios, I think that enough would have been enough Ferrothorn counterplay to enable you just to use sub-roost Kieran here, and the matchup would have been better. But yeah, unfortunately, he sub-protect, which ended up having a bad matchup against Milotic in the end with stand support. The set was this. It looks like it's timid because of the damage roll on Scarftar, not modest, and it's probably enough speed to outspeed. What is it? To outspeed Landorus Therian, max speed Lando T, which is rare, but just in case you face like a Scarf set and knock it off, it's good to be able to outspeed it. It could have had some bulk. I remember that a set that used to go around was like 56 HP Kieran, which I think might have been for. What was that for? It feels like it was for Rotom Hydra or something like that, but I can't remember exactly. Or like some kind of boosted Scald or something. But it's something like this looks quite likely. Yeah, but this team is really, really solid. I think double dragons on Rain is really interesting. We've seen people recently use double Lati on Rain. We've seen Kieran Latios on Rain. I think Hydreigon Latios on Rain is really interesting. It's like really clever stuff. Just doesn't work out in this matchup. The Polytope especially defensive, we know, because of how much it took from a defensive drill Earthquake, and I was pretty shocked to see it die to a +1 Earthquake from Gliscor at the end, which did 41%, so it must be especially defensive. Or either that or like really fast. But yeah. This team looks nice. Just unfortunately game plan didn't work out. But again, if Finch had brought one of his more standard builds, this would have, I believe, pretty comfortably won on matchup alone. So can't blame Caetano for building a team which would have beat what would have probably been a Finch team a good 8 weeks out of 10. Like if you were to play this game next week and Finch brought any number of his other normal builds, like the matchup is absolutely insane. But unfortunately, it does pretty badly against the team that the Finch did end up bringing. I think that was everything I wanted to say. There was something weird with Excadrill's EV spread on Soulwind's team. It took a power whip really, really well from Ferrothorn, which means it can be careful, but it needs to have a lot of defense investment. So it looks like it's at least 140 defense Excadrill. Something like this. Unless my calcing is all over the place. Maybe it's like 120. To take a power whip that well from Ferrothorn, it needs to have a lot of defense. So I've never seen an Excadrill that ran that much physical defense. But definitely an interesting choice, and made the spinning on Ferrothorn really, really easy. There's maybe some specific calc that lives, like maybe some kind of like T-Tar superpower or something. I don't know exactly, but that was interesting. Apart from that, I'm not sure there's too much else you can work out from these spreads. Everything looks to be quite standard. A comment I think is worth making is the general uptick in Choice Scarf T-Tar in SPL so far. So standard would have always been Troppleberry 4 attacks, but I think we've seen tons of teams in the last year which are really specifically built to take advantage of Chopple T-Tar, basically by chipping T-Tar down so low that the Chopple becomes useless. So for example, if you use spike stacking teams with Choice Specs Latios, like Chopple becomes almost useless there as like an anti-Reuniclus option because it's just not going to be healthy enough to actually make good use of Chopple. All that sort of stuff. Like same with on Rain, you have the same thing with Latios plus Thunderous T. You just chip Tyranitar so low that like it doesn't need to use Chopple anymore. So I think a shift away from Chopple T-Tar was maybe to be expected. And Choice Scarf is a really nice way of adapting, because what it does, especially with like U-turn and Baton Pass users, is it becomes an even better answer to Latios, and arguably opposing Thunderous too, assuming they're not agility. It also gives you an interim check to things like opposing Garchomp, and if you're running Ice Beam or Ice Punch, it can check Gliscor, and Superpower beats Excadrill, Terrakion, Keldeo, stuff like this. It's a really good interim check, particularly on stand balance teams. So I'm not surprised to see a shift from Choice Scarf Tyranitar. The only issue with doing that is then you have to patch up all these extra holes that you open against Alakazam. So that's why like these teams always want to run like especially defensive Celebi and Gliscor and Excadrill and creative Magma Zone sets. So that was just something interesting from the last few weeks. I can't remember the last time I saw so much Scarf Tar. But it's a set that I love, so definitely really happy to see it. Apart from that, I think that was everything. So I will do a similar video, I think, when the other 6 teams are revealed, because I think this is kind of fun to try and work out what the other sets could be. But yeah, catch you on the next one.